The morning sun rose slowly over the quiet neighborhood, painting the rows of clean houses with a soft golden glow. The sound of sprinklers clicked in rhythm across the manicured lawns, birds sang in the distance, and everything looked peaceful, too peaceful. On Maple Grove Lane, a man stood outside his freshly painted house, hands on his hips, admiring his latest project. The windows gleamed in the sunlight, their glass catching the morning rays and scattering them across the street. They were beautiful, energy-efficient, perfectly fitted, and exactly as he had planned. He had saved for them for 2 years, checked every rule, every requirement, every regulation. He even got approval from the HOA board, complete with their president's signature. It was supposed to be simple. A small upgrade to make his home more efficient and comfortable. But peace never lasted long in this neighborhood. Not with this HOA. As he turned to head inside, something caught his eye. A white envelope was taped to his front door. His smile faded. He walked up the steps slowly, his chest tightening as he saw the red stamp across the top of the envelope. HOA notice of violation. His fingers hesitated before he opened it. The paper inside felt heavier than it should. He unfolded it and began to read. Dear homeowner, it said in cold, formal print, you are hereby fined $12,000 for unauthorized window installation in violation of community standards, Section 8B. He froze, his eyes tracing the words twice, 3 times, trying to make sense of what he was reading. Unauthorized? That couldn't be right. He had the approval, he had the president's signature, the date, and even the meeting minutes where the board had voted yes. He stepped inside his house, placed the letter on the kitchen counter, and quickly opened his laptop. Within seconds, he pulled up his emails. There it was, the official HOA approval, signed and dated 6 months ago. He printed it, then the building permit, then the receipt from the licensed installer. Every paper was legitimate. They must have made a mistake, he said quietly to himself, trying to calm down. But deep down, something told him this wasn't a mistake. The HOA never made mistakes. They made problems. He walked across the street to the small HOA office, a brick building with clean glass doors and fake plants at the entrance. Inside, the air smelled like coffee and arrogance. Behind the counter sat the HOA president, a woman in her late 50s with sharp glasses, perfect posture, and a smile that never reached her eyes. Good morning, he said politely, handing her the notice. I think there's been a mistake. She took the paper, barely looking at it before glancing back at him. Oh, you must be Mr. Carter. Yes, I remember you. The window project, right? He nodded. Yes, I got this notice this morning, but I have all the approvals right here. He placed the folder on the desk and opened it carefully. She didn't even lean forward to look. Well, Mr. Carter, she said, her tone dripping with superiority, that approval is no longer valid. He frowned. What do you mean? You signed it. She adjusted her glasses. We updated our bylaws last month. Section 8B now prohibits reflective glass windows in the main viewing area of the street. Yours violate that policy. But my windows aren't reflective, he said firmly. They're tinted for energy efficiency. You approved them yourself. She smiled thinly. The rule still applies. You'll need to pay the fine or replace the windows. He stared at her, disbelief spreading through his face. That's $12,000. You can't just change rules and fine people retroactively. She crossed her arms. Actually, we can. Read your homeowner agreement. It gives us that authority. You're required to comply with all updated regulations. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. You do realize this is wrong, right? I followed every step. I got every permit. You approved it. You can't punish me for your own changes. Her smile widened just enough to show a glint of cruelty. You have 30 days to pay, Mr. Carter, or we'll file a lien on your property. He stared at her, shocked at how easily she said it. You'd take my house over windows. Rules are rules, she said coldly, tapping the counter with her pen. That's how we keep this neighborhood beautiful. He gathered his papers slowly, his movements deliberate, his jaw tight. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." "You heard me," he said, turning toward the door. "You're using your power to bully people. One day, that'll come back to you." Her fake smile faded for just a second, replaced by irritation. 30 days, she snapped. "Don't make this worse for yourself." He walked out without another word, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing through the small office. Outside, the air felt heavier. The calm suburban street suddenly seemed different, colder, smaller, filled with invisible eyes watching him. As he walked back home, he noticed neighbors looking away, pretending not to see him. Everyone knew how the HOA worked. You didn't fight them. You paid. You obeyed. Or they ruined your life. He sat down in his living room, the notice crumpled in his hand. He wasn't an angry man, not by nature. But this was different. It wasn't just about money, it was about dignity. They wanted him to bow his head and accept their lie. He wasn't going to. That night, he sat by his window, staring out into the dark, the reflection of his own face staring back. The glass looked perfect, smooth, and clean, not reflective, not flashy, just simple. It represented the work of his hands, his savings, his pride. And now it was being used to humiliate him. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer friend. "Tom," he said quietly, "can they do this?" Tom sighed over the phone. "They can, if it's in the bylaws. Even if they changed it after your project, they'll claim it applies retroactively. They've done it before. So they can just steal money." "Not exactly. You could fight it, but it'll cost you more than the fine. And if you lose, they'll add penalties." The man leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "So that's it. I just pay." "For now," Tom said carefully. "Sometimes, you have to lose small to win big later." The man said nothing, but his mind was already working. The next morning, he drove to the bank and wrote the check. His hand didn't shake, his face didn't show anger. He was calm. He placed the check in the HOA's Dropbox, walked back to his house, and closed the door. Inside, he poured himself a cup of coffee and whispered, "That's your last win." Weeks passed. The HOA sent him a confirmation letter, smugly worded, thanking him for his cooperation. They even printed his name in the monthly newsletter under homeowners in violation corrected. It was meant to shame him, but he didn't care. Every insult, every threat, every fake smile was burned into his memory, piece by piece. He began keeping a folder. He printed every notice, every email, every picture. He recorded meetings, wrote down dates, and noted every time they contradicted their own rules. The HOA thought they had one, but he was quietly building something far more dangerous than anger, a case. From that day forward, every morning when he walked past his perfect, shining windows, he didn't see glass anymore. He saw a mirror reflecting what was coming for them. And every time he passed the HOA office, he smiled slightly, whispering under his breath, 5 years from now, you'll pay for this. Days turned into weeks, but peace never returned to the man's house. The HOA had taken his $12,000, yet they weren't done punishing him. It was never about the windows anymore. It was about power. They wanted to make an example out of him, to remind every homeowner in that community what happened when someone stood up to them. It started small, letters about trash bins left out too long, though his bins were placed exactly where they always had been. Then came warnings for overgrown grass, even though his lawn was trimmed perfectly. He knew what they were doing. They wanted to break him. But every time he received a notice, he just smiled faintly, filed it in his folder, and wrote the date on it. He was documenting everything. The HOA president, Mrs. Franklin, was confident she'd silenced him for good. She even bragged during meetings, calling him a troublemaker who finally learned his lesson. But the truth was, he was learning, not how to obey, but how to outsmart them. One morning, he saw 2 HOA inspectors standing outside his house, taking photos of his windows again. He stepped out onto his porch, calm as ever, and said, "Can I help you, gentlemen?" One of them avoided eye contact. "Just routine inspection," he muttered. The man tilted his head. "Routine? For windows you already fined me for." The inspector didn't answer. They left quickly, whispering to each other. He watched them go, then walked inside and picked up his camera. He began taking photos of them from inside his home. Their license plate, their clipboard, their badges. Every detail mattered. A few days later, he received another fine, this time for unauthorized security cameras. He laughed softly when he read it. They were trying too hard. He installed more cameras anyway. They wanted him to feel trapped, but he was building his defense in silence. When the HOA newsletter came out that month, his name was in it again. Homeowner fails to maintain visual consistency with community design. They added a picture of his house, circled in red. His neighbors started whispering, giving him strange looks when he passed by. Most of them weren't bad people, just afraid. The HOA thrived on fear. But the man didn't react. He kept his calm smile, even when he saw Mrs. Franklin driving by in her black SUV, slowing down just to look at his house like she owned it. Inside, his anger was growing, but not wild, sharp, focused, patient. He knew emotions made people sloppy, and he couldn't afford that. Not yet. He started attending HOA meetings again, not to argue, but to observe. He sat quietly in the back row, listening to every word. Mrs. Franklin stood at the front like a queen addressing her subjects, speaking about community integrity and protecting property values. She used big words to sound righteous, but he noticed something strange. The budget reports never matched. The expenses were vague, the numbers rounded, and large payments kept going to a company named Greenscape Maintenance. He had never seen a single Greenscape truck in the neighborhood. When he raised his hand to ask about it, Mrs. Franklin smiled coldly. "Questions are for board members, Mr. Carter, not residents." He nodded silently and took note of every word she said. That night, he opened his laptop and searched for Greenscape Maintenance LLC. The result made him pause. It was registered under a local address, the same one as Mrs. Franklin's brother. He leaned back in his chair, whispering to himself, "So that's how you do it." Over the next few months, he quietly collected proof, bank statements leaked by a sympathetic board member, invoices that didn't match real work, and emails showing the HOA had changed several rules just to issue higher fines. Every new piece of evidence went into his growing folder. But while he was investigating, the HOA continued their attacks. One morning, he found a bright orange sticker on his door, "Final notice. Failure to comply will result in property lien." That was the last straw. He walked straight to the HOA office, his steps firm and slow. Mrs. Franklin was inside, talking on the phone, her voice cheerful until she saw him. "Oh, Mr. Carter," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I hope you're not here to complain again." He placed the orange notice on her desk, leaning forward slightly. "You've been busy," he said calmly. "And you've made mistakes." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me. I paid your fine. I followed your rules. But you didn't stop. You kept pushing. You're not enforcing the law, you're abusing it." "I don't appreciate being threatened," she snapped. He straightened up, his tone quiet but cutting. "That wasn't a threat. That was a fact. You think you're untouchable because you hide behind bylaws and board votes. But one day, all of this," he gestured around the office, "is going to crash, and I'll be there to watch it happen." She scoffed, pretending not to care. "You really think anyone will listen to you?" "They will," he said, turning toward the door. "Because I'll make sure they have no choice." He walked out without another word. Behind him, she sat frozen, her fake confidence cracked for the first time. That night, she called an emergency board meeting, telling her members that "Mr. Carter is planning to sue us," but they laughed it off. They didn't understand who they were dealing with. Over the next year, the man watched silently as the HOA grew more arrogant, more reckless. They fined other residents, raised fees, and approved useless improvement projects no one wanted. He attended every meeting, recording quietly, gathering signatures from homeowners who were tired of being bullied. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was preparing to bring them all down. One day, he received an anonymous letter in his mailbox. Inside was a photocopy of a bank statement showing a massive transfer, $50,000 from the HOA account to greenscape maintenance. On the bottom corner, written in pencil, were 3 words, "You were right." He smiled for the first time in months. It meant someone inside the HOA was helping him. The next morning, he placed that paper in his folder, now thick enough to fill a binder. He looked at it for a long moment before whispering, "You wanted power, Mrs. Franklin. I'll show you what real power looks like." From that day on, he stopped reacting to their letters, stopped replying to their warnings. He let them think they'd finally beaten him. They didn't realize they were walking into their own trap, one he'd been building slowly, patiently, and perfectly for years. 5 years passed, and the quiet suburban neighborhood that once mocked him had forgotten the story of the man with the windows, but he hadn't forgotten anything. Every notice, every fine, every insult still lived in the thick folder locked inside his cabinet. The HOA believed he'd given up. They believed the $12,000 fine had broken him, but it hadn't. It had changed him. The man who once cared about keeping peace had learned the language of power, the kind that didn't shout, the kind that waited. His house stood perfect, his windows shining like mirrors of memory, and every time sunlight hit the glass, it reminded him of the day he swore they would regret what they did. Over the years, the HOA grew greedier, turning into a business rather than a board. They fined people for fences too high, for paint too bright, even for leaving Christmas lights up too long. They ruled by fear. Mrs. Franklin, the president, became famous in the community for her smug speeches and endless demands. She loved her control, standing at the podium like a politician, surrounded by people who nodded but secretly hated her. The man watched it all quietly, his calm never breaking. But behind his silence, a plan was forming, one built with patience, law, and precision. One evening, as rain fell softly outside, he sat at his desk with the folder open before him. Years of documents lay neatly arranged, HOA budgets, fee increases, photos, and emails. He had connections now, neighbors who trusted him, people who whispered their frustrations at meetings and slipped him copies of receipts. They didn't know what he was building, but they knew it was for all of them. He opened his laptop and typed the words, HOA financial law violations. Hours turned into nights, nights into weeks, and soon his search had grown deeper than he expected. He learned about embezzlement, misuse of funds, and the laws that could take down an entire board. The more he read, the clearer it became. The HOA had crossed more lines than they could count. They weren't just corrupt, they were sloppy. One document in particular caught his attention. A state record showing HOA funds transferred to a private company called Greenscape Maintenance LLC. The name made him sit up straight. He'd heard it before, printed on invoices that never matched any real work done. He opened the county business registry, and when the owner's name appeared on the screen, he smiled slowly. Registered owner, Robert Franklin. Mrs. Franklin's brother. His heart beat slower, steadier, colder. "There it is," he whispered. He clicked print and watched the paper slide out of the tray, hot from the machine, each line a nail in the HOA's coffin. Over the next few months, he gathered everything, bank statements, expense reports, meeting minutes where maintenance expenses were approved without question. He even found an HOA insurance document that listed fake contractor names. It was fraud, clear, undeniable, and huge. He didn't rush to expose it. No, he wanted it perfect. He met quietly with an attorney who specialized in HOA law, a calm woman with sharp eyes and sharper words. He handed her the folder without saying much. She flipped through it for several minutes before looking up. "Do you realize what you have here?" He nodded slowly. "Enough to make them wish they'd never met me." She smiled faintly. "This isn't just a small claim. This is years of financial manipulation. You could not only recover your money, you could end them." "I don't want to destroy them," he said calmly. "I just want the truth to burn." The lawyer leaned back, impressed by his composure. "Then let's do it quietly," she said. You let me handle the paperwork, and we'll make sure every move is by the book. No mistakes. He agreed, his tone steady. It took them 5 years to think they'd won. I can wait a few more months to prove they didn't. Meanwhile, the HOA carried on as usual, completely unaware that their downfall had already begun. Mrs. Franklin strutted around the neighborhood like a queen, issuing fines and holding meetings full of empty promises. She had no idea her brother's name was about to surface in every report, every hearing, every headline. The man started small. He filed a request for the HOA's annual financial report, citing transparency rights under state law. When they refused, claiming confidentiality, he smiled. It was the first mistake they made in his trap. His lawyer filed a formal complaint with the county housing authority. Within weeks, auditors were assigned to review irregularities in the HOA's accounts. The first crack appeared when the auditors asked for receipts for landscaping work totaling over $80,000. None existed. The second crack came when a former HOA board member admitted under questioning that Mrs. Franklin personally approved payments without board consent. Rumors began to spread like smoke through the neighborhood. People whispered during morning walks, texted in private groups, asked questions at meetings that Mrs. Franklin could no longer answer. Where did the money go? Why hasn't our playground been fixed? Why are our dues higher every year? The once proud president started to panic, her confident speeches turning shaky. The man attended every meeting, sitting silently at the back, watching her unravel. She avoided his gaze, pretending not to notice him, but she could feel it, the calm presence of the man she had once mocked. Every word she spoke trembled under his quiet stare. One night after a meeting, as the parking lot emptied, she caught up to him. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. Whatever you're doing, it won't work. People love this community. He turned slowly, his voice low and steady. People love peace. You stole that from them. I'm just taking it back. She glared at him, her face pale under the streetlight. You'll regret crossing me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled faintly. You said the same thing 5 years ago. How's that working out? She froze, unable to respond. He walked away without another word, the sound of his footsteps fading into the quiet night. Inside his home later that evening, he opened his folder one last time, flipping through every page, every photo, every signature. He knew the investigation would expose everything now. It was too late for them to hide. He closed the folder gently, almost lovingly, as if sealing a story that was finally ready to be told. You fined me $12,000 for approved windows, he said softly, his reflection clear in the glass beside him. Now let's see what the state fines you for fraud. The rain outside had stopped, and the street was quiet, the only light coming from his living room window, the same one that had started it all. The next few weeks were the calm before the storm, the kind of quiet that hides thunder just beyond the horizon. The HOA carried on with fake smiles and forced confidence, pretending nothing was wrong, but whispers had already started spreading like cracks in glass. The man didn't need to speak anymore. His silence was loud enough to shake their foundation. The investigation had begun quietly. 2 auditors from the state housing department arrived one morning, parking their silver sedan near the community office. They didn't announce themselves or make noise. They just walked in with clipboards, polite smiles, and official badges that made even Mrs. Franklin's confident tone stumble for the first time in years. She tried to act calm, offering them coffee, pretending it was all routine, but inside, she was trembling. The auditors asked for financial records, maintenance invoices, and expense receipts for the past 5 years. Of course, she said quickly, forcing a laugh. We're always organized. But when she opened the cabinet drawers, she froze. Half the files were missing. The man had predicted this. Corruption always leaves gaps. The auditors exchanged glances, jotting notes down quietly. We'll need full records by the end of the week, one said. It's a standard audit procedure. Of course, she repeated, her voice thinner now. As soon as they left, she called her brother, the owner of Greenscape Maintenance. They're asking questions, she hissed. What do I do? Relax, he said. Just stall them. Shred whatever looks suspicious. But it was too late. The auditors had already seen enough to smell something rotten. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, residents were finally asking questions of their own. Why is the playground still broken? Why haven't the sidewalks been repaired? Where did our fees go? The once feared HOA now faced the same crowd it used to control, and the fear in their voices was replaced by anger. The man watched it all quietly from his porch, sipping his coffee like it was just another peaceful morning. But inside, his heart beat steady with satisfaction. He didn't gloat, he didn't speak, he let the truth do the talking. A week later, the auditors returned. This time they brought someone else, a county investigator. He wasn't friendly. His eyes were sharp, his questions sharper. Mrs. Franklin, he said, flipping through a folder, we can't locate documentation for several large transactions to greenscape maintenance. Can you provide proof of completed work? Her mouth went dry. Those records might be in storage. We checked storage, he said flatly. They are not there. She swallowed hard. Then, they must have been misplaced. Or destroyed, the investigator said calmly, watching her reaction. Sweat rolled down her neck as she forced a smile. I assure you, everything was done properly. The man attended that meeting quietly, sitting in the back row as a resident. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. When the investigator mentioned greenscape maintenance, he watched Mrs. Franklin's hand twitch on her pen. He knew that name was her undoing. The investigator continued, according to the state records, this company is owned by your brother, correct? The entire room went silent. Mrs. Franklin froze, her eyes wide. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, the investigator said. I'm stating a fact. That's a direct conflict of interest, and without invoices, it could qualify as fraud. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Residents whispered to one another, eyes darting toward the man in the back. For years, they had watched him suffer under her rules, and now, fate was turning the wheel. Mrs. Franklin stammered, this is outrageous. You can't just accuse me without evidence. The investigator closed his folder. That's exactly what we're collecting. He stood and walked out, leaving her frozen at the table. That night, she stayed late in the office, surrounded by boxes of old papers. The building was silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. She opened drawers, yanked out files, and tore through receipts, trying to find something, anything, that could save her. But all she found were ghosts of her own greed. Every folder she opened led to another missing invoice, another unexplained expense. When she realized how deep it all went, her knees weakened, and she sank into her chair, breathing heavily. Outside, through the window, a car sat quietly under a street lamp. The man was inside, watching, his face half hidden in shadow. He didn't smile. He didn't move. He just waited. The next morning, news spread that state auditors had seized HOA computers and financial files. An emergency board meeting was called, but this time, half the board didn't show up. They were scared. The few who came looked nervous, pale, and tired. The man attended again, sitting silently in the corner as residents filled every seat. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with curiosity and fear. Mrs. Franklin entered late, her voice trembling as she said, "Everyone please calm down. This is just a misunderstanding." But no one believed her anymore. A resident stood and said, "You lied to us. You fined us for years while you stole our money." Another shouted, "You took from us and used it for yourself." She raised her hands, shouting back, "You don't understand how hard it is to manage this place." The man finally stood up, his calm voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "No," he said quietly. "We understand perfectly. You made it hard because you liked the control." The room went still. Her face turned pale. For the first time, her confidence shattered completely. "You think you can prove anything," she snapped, her voice breaking. The man stepped closer, placing a folder on the table in front of her. "You already did," he said softly. She looked down and saw the printed emails, the bank statements, the transfers, all of it. The walls closed in on her as the board members began to whisper. "Where did he get those?" one of them asked. She couldn't speak. She knew where he got them, from the same system she thought no one would ever look into. He turned to the room, speaking clearly now. "This community deserves better. For years we were treated like criminals for painting our doors the wrong color, for trimming our lawns the wrong way. Meanwhile, our money was stolen under our noses. You fined me $12,000 for windows you approved. But I kept every paper, every email, every lie. And now, I'm not the one on trial. You are." The crowd erupted, clapping, shouting, cheering. Mrs. Franklin tried to speak, but her voice was drowned by the noise. She ran out of the room, tears burning in her eyes. The man stood still for a moment, then quietly left through the back door. He didn't need applause. Justice didn't need noise. As he walked home under the fading light, he looked up at his windows, glowing orange from the sunset. They reflected peace now, not anger. He stood on his porch, hands in his pockets, and whispered, "The investigation has begun. And this time, it's not me they'll fine, it's them." Behind him, the sound of police sirens echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder with every passing second. The storm finally broke, and this time it wasn't silent. It began with whispers, but within days it turned into headlines. The HOA of Maple Grove was under full investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority. The story spread fast, neighbors shared screenshots, local reporters camped near the office, and news vans parked along the main road. The quiet, perfect neighborhood was now a battlefield of truth. The man watched it all unfold from his porch, not with arrogance but calm satisfaction. He had waited years for this moment, and now the world was seeing what he had seen all along. The first official report came out 2 weeks later. It confirmed everything: thousands of dollars missing, false maintenance claims, and forged signatures. The same company name, Greenscape Maintenance, appeared over and over. The report stated that Mrs. Franklin had personally approved every transaction. Her brother's company had received more than $200,000 over 5 years, and not a single landscaping project had ever been completed. When the news reached the residents, they erupted in anger. People who once avoided eye contact with the man now came to his door, knocking nervously. "We're so sorry," one elderly couple said. "You were right all along." He smiled kindly and said, "You don't need to apologize. Just don't forget what they did." Another neighbor, the same man who once voted to increase HOA dues, shook his head and said, "They fined me for painting my garage door beige instead of tan, and all that time they were stealing from us." The man nodded. That's how corruption works. They make rules to hide behind while breaking the real ones. Across town, Mrs. Franklin sat in a lawyer's office, her hands shaking as she held a copy of the state's findings. Her voice trembled as she said, "This can't be happening. I followed procedures." Her lawyer looked up from the document, his tone cold. "Procedures don't include wiring money to your brother's fake company. They have the records, Patricia." She froze at the sound of her first name. 4 years, she had been Madam President, untouchable, powerful. Now, she was just another defendant. "What do I do?" she whispered. "You cooperate," the lawyer said simply. "And you pray." She stared out the window as flashbacks hit her. The day she laughed at the man for defending his windows, the smirk when she told him to pay up or lose his house. Those moments replayed like echoes of her downfall. Back in the neighborhood, the HOA office was sealed by investigators. Yellow tape covered the doors, boxes of documents were carried out, and residents gathered in clusters, whispering in disbelief. One of them spotted the man walking by and said, "They're saying the board might be dissolved." He stopped, his calm gaze steady. "Good," he said. "Let it all crumble. Maybe then something honest can be built." Days later, the man received a call from his lawyer. "It's done," she said. "The state is filing charges. You'll get your restitution, and the HOA will face a lawsuit." He didn't react right away. He just looked out at his yard, the sunlight gleaming off his once-illegal windows. "How much?" he asked. "$75,000, she replied. "Settlement plus damages." He let out a soft breath, almost a laugh. "And who signs the check?" "Mrs. Franklin," she said. There was silence on the line. Then he said quietly, "That's poetic." The following week, the HOA members were called to a meeting to discuss the future of the neighborhood. It wasn't in the usual conference room with polished tables and printed agendas. It was held outdoors, under the open sky, because the office was now a crime scene. The man arrived early, taking a seat near the back. People gathered slowly, their faces filled with guilt, anger, and confusion. When Mrs. Franklin arrived, escorted by her attorney, the crowd went silent. Her perfect hair was undone, her face pale, her confidence gone. The investigator stood at the front and began reading the findings aloud. The HOA of Maple Grove has been found guilty of misappropriation of community funds, falsifying records, and imposing unlawful fines. Restitution will be paid to affected homeowners. The crowd erupted, some in cheers, some in disbelief. One man shouted, "You ruined our trust." A woman added, "You made us afraid to live in our own homes." Mrs. Franklin's voice cracked as she said, "I was only doing what I thought was best for the community." The man rose from his chair, walking to the front, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "You were doing what was best for yourself," he said softly. "You used power to control, not to protect. You forgot this place belonged to the people, not to your pride." She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears and shame. "You won," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "We all lost. You just realized it too late." The investigator cleared his throat and handed her a document. "As ordered by the court, you will personally sign restitution checks for the affected homeowners." Her hands trembled as she took the pen. One by one, she began signing. The man stood silently, watching her write his name across a check for $75,000. The pen scratched softly against the paper, each stroke a reminder of how far she had fallen. When she finished, she handed it to him without meeting his eyes. He looked down at the check, then back at her. "You fined me $12,000 for windows you said didn't fit your rules," he said quietly. "Now, this check fits just fine." Gasps and murmurs filled the crowd, but he didn't stay for praise. He walked away as the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting golden reflections across his windows. The sound of papers rustling behind him faded as he stepped onto the path home, his footsteps steady and calm. That night, the HOA sign that once stood proudly at the entrance of the neighborhood was gone. In its place was a small board that simply read, "Maple Grove Community, Homeowners, Not Rulers." The man smiled when he saw it, knowing his fight had changed more than just his own life. It had changed the heart of the community itself. Justice had finally spoken, and its voice was quiet, steady, and undeniable. The morning sun rose quietly over Maple Grove. And for the first time in years, there was no tension in the air. No threats, no notices, no envelopes taped to doors. The only sound was the rustle of leaves and the calm hum of sprinklers watering the neat lawns. The man stood on his porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the light dance across the glass of his windows. They looked brighter today, not because they were new, but because they were finally free from judgment. A car pulled into his driveway, the tires crunching softly against the gravel. It was his lawyer, a confident smile on her face. She stepped out, holding an envelope in her hand. "It's official," she said, walking up to him. "The final restitution came through this morning." He took the envelope, feeling its weight. Inside was a crisp check, heavy with meaning. The name printed on it made him pause. It was signed by the same woman who once threatened to take his home. Mrs. Patricia Franklin. The handwriting was neat, but shaky, the kind that belonged to someone whose pride had been crushed. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked up at his lawyer. "You know," he said quietly, "it's strange. I don't feel angry anymore." She smiled. "That's because you already won." He nodded slowly. Not against her, he said softly, but against the kind of people who think power means control. He thanked her and walked back inside his house, the check still in his hand. The walls that once felt small and suffocating now seemed full of light. He placed the check on his table and sat down, staring at it in silence. He remembered every insult, every meeting where they laughed at him, every sleepless night wondering how to fight back. It wasn't the money that mattered, it was what it represented. It was proof that truth, when patient, always finds its way. Later that day, he went for a walk through the neighborhood. People waved as he passed, smiles replacing the nervous glances that once followed him. The same residents who once avoided him now greeted him warmly. "Morning, Mr. Carter," one called out. "Morning," he replied, his tone calm and friendly. As he walked past the old HOA office, now empty with its windows covered in dust, he stopped. The golden letters on the sign were half broken, the paint peeling off. He reached out and brushed his fingers across it. "You took my peace for a while," he said quietly, "but I took it back." Across the street, a group of kids played near the park. The swings creaked, laughter filled the air, and their joy carried across the lake like wind. The man smiled, realizing the sound he was hearing was freedom, something the neighborhood hadn't felt in years. That evening, the new HOA board, now led by honest residents, invited him to a community meeting. The difference was clear the moment he walked in. Gone were the smug speeches, the power plays, the fake smiles. People spoke respectfully, listening to one another, working together. The man sat at the back, watching quietly. When the new president, a kind woman in her 40s, addressed the room, she said, "We all know why we're here. Because someone reminded us what fairness looks like." Then she turned to him. "Mr. Carter, would you like to say a few words?" He stood slowly, all eyes turning toward him. He looked around, at faces that once judged him but now admired him, and spoke simply. "I don't have much to say," he began. "I just want you all to remember something. Rules aren't meant to control people. They're meant to protect them. When we forget that, we lose what makes a community real." The room fell silent. Some nodded, others wiped quiet tears from their eyes. "We lost our way for a while," he continued. "But I believe this neighborhood can be better now. Not because of one person, but because everyone here learned something important. No one is above accountability." When he sat back down, the crowd broke into soft applause. Not loud, not dramatic, but genuine. It was the kind of moment that carried peace instead of noise. After the meeting, the new president approached him and said, "We're renaming the community center. It'll be called Carter Hall, to remind us of what integrity means." He smiled faintly. "You don't need to do that," he said. "Just keep it honest. That's all the reminder anyone needs." As the sun set, he walked back home, the streets glowing gold under the evening light. When he reached his porch, he stopped for a moment and looked at his windows. They reflected the sunset perfectly, gold and orange like fire, but peaceful. He sat down in his chair, leaning back, feeling the soft wind on his face. The check was still on his table inside, untouched. He didn't rush to cash it. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was a symbol, a full circle of justice that didn't need celebration. It just needed silence. The neighborhood lights flickered on one by one as the sky darkened, the sound of laughter echoing in the distance. He closed his eyes for a moment, whispering to himself, 5 years, $12,000, and a lesson they'll never forget. In the quiet that followed, the world felt finally balanced again. The kind of peace that isn't loud, but strong enough to make every wrong finally feel right. Months passed, and Maple Grove was no longer the same place it used to be. The fear that once gripped every street corner had vanished like fog after sunrise. The lawns looked greener, the laughter louder, and the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, people walked freely, talking, smiling, sharing coffee in the mornings without watching over their shoulders for the next HOA letter. The man watched this transformation quietly from his porch, his cup of coffee warm in his hand, the scent of fresh-cut grass drifting through the breeze. The windows behind him reflected the morning sun. The same windows that once caused him pain, now symbols of victory. He didn't need to remind anyone what happened. The story lived in the air. It was whispered between neighbors, retold to new families moving in. How one man stood up against corruption and won not just for himself, but for everyone. Across the street, a young couple was moving into the house that once belonged to the old HOA president. Boxes filled the driveway, and laughter echoed as they carried furniture inside. The man watched them for a moment, remembering the day he first moved here, full of hope, before rules turned kindness into control. Now, that hope was returning. The doorbell rang softly, pulling him from his thoughts. When he opened it, he found the new HOA president, the kind woman who had rebuilt everything with honesty and heart. She smiled warmly, holding a small frame wrapped in paper. "We wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything." He unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a simple plaque, polished wood with golden letters that read, "Integrity restores peace, in honor of Mr. Carter." He stared at it for a long moment, his usually calm face softening into a rare, genuine smile. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "We wanted to," she replied. "You reminded us that a neighborhood isn't made of walls and rules, it's made of people." He nodded, his voice almost a whisper. "Keep it that way." After she left, he placed the plaque above his living room fireplace, right beside the folder that started it all. He never threw that folder away. It wasn't out of bitterness, but remembrance. It was proof that patience, not anger, wins wars. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the lake shimmered in golden light. Families gathered at the park for the first community picnic in years. Children ran across the grass, dogs barked playfully, and the sound of laughter rolled across the calm water. The man walked over quietly, blending into the crowd. When people saw him, they waved and called out greetings. "Mr. Carter, come join us." He smiled and sat by the edge of the lake, watching the reflections dance across the surface. One of the kids ran up and asked innocently, "Is it true you made the bad HOA lady go away?" He chuckled softly. "No, kid," he said kindly. "She made herself go away. I just didn't stop her." The boy giggled and ran back to play, leaving the man smiling at the water. The sound of the wind moved gently through the trees, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the lake was breathing again. Calm, alive, free. As night settled in, lanterns floated across the lake, glowing like little stars resting on the surface. The community had started this new tradition to celebrate fairness and unity. The man stood among them, holding one lantern in his hands. Before releasing it, he whispered softly, "To peace hard-earned." He let it go, watching it drift away slowly, its reflection stretching across the water like a glowing promise. Beside him, the new HOA president said, "You've given this place a new start, you know that." He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the glowing lights. "No," he said. "We all gave it one. I just reminded everyone how." They stood together in silence, the world around them bathed in golden light and quiet joy. As the crowd began to cheer, someone started a soft applause. It spread slowly until the entire lakefront was clapping. But the man didn't turn around. He just stood still, feeling the peace he had fought for finally settle in his chest. Later that night, when the lights dimmed and people went home, he returned to his porch one last time. The moonlight fell across his windows, the glass shining like liquid silver. He sat down, closed his eyes, and listened to the crickets singing in the distance. The check still rested inside a drawer, untouched, and that was how it would stay. Money could be spent, but peace, real peace, was priceless. He looked out at the lake one last time before whispering, "They fined me $12,000 for windows that let in the light. Now, that same light shows what they couldn't see, the truth." His words drifted softly into the night breeze, disappearing over the still water. The camera would pull back slowly, showing his house glowing warmly under the moonlight, surrounded by quiet, laughter, and the shimmering reflection of lanterns floating across the lake, symbols of a community reborn from arrogance into peace. The story ended not with anger or triumph, but something far greater, justice delivered, calm restored, and one man's quiet strength becoming the foundation of something better.